Hello, everyone, and welcome to PAEA September WebinART. Tonight, Benjamin Hoffman, PAEA's Region 10 representative, will speak about using sketchbooks as an integral part of his art program. Registered participants will receive a Google form link via email in a day or two to fill out for their 1 hour of VAC 48 credit. Before we begin the webinar, we are asking participants to mute their microphones and keep their video off. Those controls are located in the bottom left corner of the controls bar. We are also asking everyone to sign in on the chat roll. Please use the same name in which you registered for this event. The chat roll can be found along the bottom in the controls bar as well. Signing in will ensure that you receive the Act 48 link. Let's get this webinar rolling. Ben, take it away.
All right, so hope everyone can still see me. My name is Ben Hoffman. I'm here from Kutztown, Pennsylvania, located in Berks County in the lower right part of the state. This is my 4th year teaching here at the high school. I've been doing a variety of things here, and tonight it's an opportunity for me to share some of the cool things that we've been doing with sketchbooks and how they've really become an integral part of what it is that we do here. I also have the chat here open while I'm going through my presentation. I'm going to swap over to that in just a moment. So if at any point this evening questions arise, I'm happy to answer those, and I believe the resources and this presentation will be available to share at the end. So let's swap on over. All right. I'm going to move some stuff out of my way because unlike your screens, there's a lot happening on mine. All right. So I'm going to say that we are here. Everything looks good. Power of sketchbooks. All right. We're ready to go. So let's click through this. So a little bit about me. So I am a graduate of Kutztown University. Kutztown University is just up the road from where I'm located here at Kutztown High School. Currently pursuing my master's in ed as well as my now arts administration, as was mentioned, the Region 10 representative for PAEA, and we have what is the Kutztown University Art Society, and that is a new organization that I have been fortunate enough to chair, and it's an opportunity to promote the arts in youth and through the college campus. This is a little bit another picture of our classroom. This is our back room. It does not look like this anymore. As many of you can imagine, your own rooms are being taken over by students. But just a little bit of some of the courses that I offer. We have art studio, ceramics studio, drawing and painting, digital photography, and 3D design. Those are both half-year courses. Fine art appreciation is a required humanities course for all 10th graders. Art therapies for my life skills students, independent studies, contemporary craft will be a new course I'm teaching this spring, and then concept design is something I'm having in the works for next year. So a large variety of classes. So just to kind of give a preface, sketchbooks really mean a lot to me and my students, and we've gone through several iterations of what works, what doesn't work, and this is kind of just my personal affinity. So it's ingrained in my own best practices. I'm a visual learner, as many of you are, but I believe it's really important to recognize that our students are going to appreciate being able to sketch and take notes in a way that's most appropriate. I was that student that usually got in trouble for doodling and not looking up at the teacher when taking notes. So I'm being accepting of that to when those students don't make eye contact with me, when they're not looking up. And I'm sure we're trying to build those life skills, but it's one of those things that's worked for me. The second one is it transfers into my personal work. I'm going to show you a few pieces of how it's kind of just been preparatory studies. We all do this. We kind of sketch, we design, and then it happens. The third is explored from various perspectives. So you'll see I've really kind of looked at this from every perspective. Things have gone absolutely wrong. Some things have gone great. And then the last is just an outlet for students, the access to materials, authentic reflection, and ownership. So really making them a part of this process. So here's one of my first slides. This is kind of those preparatory studies. This is my work, a series I have about mediocre. But again, you can see my sketchbook on either side of the image. Just it's drawing. It's the basic for what we all can kind of relate to. It has its importance. And it's really important for those students to see that sketches do become something tangible when they're done. Sometimes sketches can live, but sometimes they can disappear. Here's another preparatory study, if you've ever been around the Boyertown area, just to show the process, starting from a pencil sketch, an idea, moving to that colored pencil version, adding the notes, and then that 3D physical version when it's all said and done. So it's really valuable for my students to be able to see that resource. And it's more than just a drawing. There's notes, there's reflections, there's back and forth. So kind of building upon that, this is where I thrive the most and what my kids love and why journals have become such an important part of my curriculum. So this was a summer institute with Kutztown 2 years now. And so as a visual learner, the modality by which I understand content includes a combination of writings and visuals. So these were just guided notes that I took and made while listening to the lecturers. You know, they definitely happened more than just in the time that was allocated for that, 40-minute part of the studio. But you can see that I'm illustrating, I'm taking notes, it's ordered, but then I'm filling random voids with patterns and shapes. But the most important thing is I'm making connections when merging those two ideas of the visual and the written. For some students, it's a little challenging to see that distinction, but for me, it was really easy to kind of say, I'm paying attention, but it's through pictures. And sometimes I can reference this picture and go, oh, I remember how we do it. I don't always need to have the words there. This became a resource. And here's 2 more illustrations that came about from that class. So just again, reiterating, I can easily remember that which was heard through visual illustrations, as can many of our students. But it's preparing students to take notes in a format that's most appropriate for them. And you're going to hear me say that a lot throughout this presentation. It's what's appropriate to them. And again, matching their learning style. You can see I also really love black and white. This is something that reoccurs. So keeping that idea of visual journaling, these are, again, a few other examples of my own work in a course previously. And you see that I'm referencing work that I did from some of my master's courses, and it's because many of us know as teachers, I do have, an active practice for myself, but it's challenging to keep up with that work. So this is the time where I get to be the most creative. Sometimes it's in those academic settings. So here's another just example of just some notes I took on differentiated instruction, and it was just meandering patterns and shapes. But if you were to ask me to point out any part of these illustrations, I can recall the content just like that. And this is a process and model that I've shared with my students, and they see all the time that they're now starting to do some of the same things. And it's not just in my classroom. It's extending into their own classes, sciences and math and history. So this is the one that really kind of jump-started this, because now at our district, we're pushing for visual literacy, or just specifically literacy, and I'm pushing to the staff to think about this as a visual literacy. Our previous superintendent, when he first came 3 years ago, asked if I would take notes during his address to the district. Meanwhile, this illustration you see here is probably 5-6 feet in length, maybe 3.5 feet tall. And I sat there on stage and drew while his presentation was happening into the audience, and I was just drawing. And it was really interesting for the audience to be able to see how I was kind of taking in that content and illustrating it. And there's not as many words as some of those previous illustrations I showed you, but it spoke to his presentation. And this was then really exciting because now some of the staff were there and they were incorporating this in their classes, allowing our students to notate without always it being so here's words and sentences. It was more just visuals. Just a few other examples, just some sketchbooks, right? I'm really just diverse: collage, multimedia, paint, illustration, open to anything. And there's some more of my personal work. So how I make sketchbooks accessible. So every student is required to have a sketchbook in any of my classes. Right now I have just shy of 100 students. I should have shared that we're a small district, about 400 for the entire high school. I see 100 of them every day. A $5 studio fee supplies students with a sketchbook. And that is something I've worked out with my district. And if you are fortunate, I can share that my district pays for these sketchbooks every year out of my budget. They're probably $5.80 or almost $6 through, I use Blick. So I don't make all of the money back, but I'm fortunate that the district allows me to then charge students $5. And that $5 then supports other things throughout the year. We run out of white paint, whatever the case may be. I have the funds to be able to go out and just buy that without another purchase order and the tedious processes of buying supplies. Upper level students are now building their own sketchbooks, and I'll walk you through that process at the end of this presentation. And across every studio, it is worth 30% of their grade, all sketchbook entries and journal entries. So let's get really into now the importance of the sketchbook. So it's a new way of thinking, looking, interpreting, and responding. It gives students a voice, whether it's personal, it's communal, or collaborative. I always invite students to work in each other's sketchbooks with that given permission. Of course, it extends opportunities to all types of learners. We have tactile, visual, kinesthetic, etc. But again, like I mentioned before, it's not exclusive to only the art room. My students will beg and plead when I have sketchbook collection days, can I get it done and graded that period? Because they want to take it to their next class. They're not using lined notebooks in that next class. They're using their personal sketchbook. So when I open up, I'm going to find math problems. I'm going to find notes on history. But it's great. Like they're upset. I've had to stop grading sketchbooks on Fridays because they knew I would take them for the weekend. I need to do it in the sometime during my week, and that's a good problem to have. And of course, it's a collection of resources to use as reference in the future. Okay. So where I started with students at a glance, these are just the 3 things I want to hit through: traditional material studies, drawings from observation, and developing models. So you can see here, just a very traditional, this was set up around the classroom. We had all the different materials set up. We were doing a piece inspired by Chuck Close, and the students went around and added these different materials in their sketchbook. Self-explanatory, I'm sure we've all done something similar. The second, right, is drawing from observation. Students are doing still lives. We're doing the traditional, here's a resource, try and replicate that in your sketchbook. Nothing out of the ordinary. And I will share, you're going to see some exemplary pieces this evening, but as you can see on this screen, I do have every learner. We all do. So I am not by any means secluding or excluding those students this evening, but just to show you some of the exemplary sketchbooks, every student is working at an ability and level that is appropriate for them. And I take that in consideration when we grade. And then of course, just developing models. And something I just want to tag, and I did not put this in my presentation. I was at a PAEA conference last year or 2 years ago now. And I'm very ingrained with journaling and drawing, but I had a presenter simply say, well, why is it that we always require ceramicists to draw out their idea first? And why is it that we can't accept a paper model or a sculpture, a smaller version, as their sketch? So even then, I have students asking to make sculpted versions. The one on the right here is this young lady's first piece, but it could become a series. She can continue to try these. She actually had a paper model, which I unfortunately don't have an image of, but understanding that process and allowing the students to present that, right? Just how do we take that in? So how I first graded, of course, looking at rubrics, peer reviews, personal reflections. This is what it first looked like. There's nothing pretty about it. These were teacher-led prompts. They were always extensions of classroom learning. So on the top left, you can see we were looking at positive and negative space. And I had these kind of 2x2 grids, and there were multiple requirements. I asked in the top left a definition. So the students had to write, what is positive and negative space? Blah, right? And then creatively show examples of positive and negative space. Okay, so this student on the top left, they kind of showed the earbuds, and then they showed things being colored in some areas not. And then I always had this create an engaging composition. And then on the bottom right, choose an object to use, and they would use this object over and over and over. So for this young individual, they chose earbuds. Well, then you can see the next prompt was depth. And you can see, again, there's the definition, there's a couple questions, create an engaging composition, and they had to somehow include the earbuds again, but now using depth. So you can see the artist had added the drop shadow, but the prompts were so direct and I wasn't getting anything creative from them. The students were just getting them done the night before. I should share, I do have my students every day. It's only for 40 minutes or 45 minutes. We have a new schedule every other day. But even so, I gave them 2 weeks and they were knocking it out the night before. There was no investment. There was no engagement. So you can see I've marked earlier versions, lack of engagement. I started to loosen up a little bit. I tried allowing them to be a little bit more free and just showcase some of the artists of their interest, showcase places that they have. And there is that same prompt at the bottom left. There's that 4-block definition prompt, but I was being a little bit more loose with the expectation. And to no surprise, the responses were so much more fun. The students were excited about what they were looking at. I'm getting collage, I'm getting writing, I'm getting splatter paint. I mean, they're starting to take off. And I said, okay, I'm getting somewhere. So less requirements for the students can be scary, right? We're not going to grade these things, but as you can see, it's in greater engagement. Students are finding that they're making meaningful connections on their own. So I have to move a couple things. I apologize. I have a lot on my screen. So what I discovered, the more general I was with prompts, the greater variation and personalization I received from students. So I reference this. Consider a unit that's so deeply rooted in content, simply too large to cover in class. Keeping that in mind, what specific pathways might students take to further investigate and advance their own knowledge that supports not only the unit, but their own personal interests? And I share this because there's a lot happening in our rooms. And you can see here, this is my classroom, and students are doing various tasks. Some of them are drawing, some of them are conversing, some of them are independently on their own, but some of them have ideas that I can't get to and think that they don't fit in my curriculum. So I really started to, in the past year and a half now, converted our class to what is a choice and inquiry-based space. So just to reiterate for those who aren't totally knowing or on board with this yet, choice-based learning is a process in which learners have a greater sense of control over the way their interests, backgrounds, and preferences work together to enhance their learning and determine how they interact with educational content. So in short term, it's giving students a voice to create things that come out of their own ideas. Inquiry is simply asking questions and finding the answers to those questions. And of course, that is a very abbreviated outlook on that, but there's so much more for what the students can take on. So thinking about choice, you know, there's choice within the media, maybe there's choice within the size and how the students can manipulate materials, but still maybe thinking about it from a thematic lens, giving the students one thing, one theme, one object, but letting them take it off in their own specific tangent, so to speak. So keeping that in mind then, I allowed the students to just propose pieces that were more important, right? We've done the drawing from observation. We're doing these traditional formalistic qualities. But I thought, you know, let's give the students an opportunity to try things on their own. And this wasn't every day. This was at the end of every marking period or an anchor, allowing the students, you know what, you got done what I've asked you. Let's see what you'd like to do. And this is a resource that I'm happy to share. It's just here's an objective of, you know, develop a theme, develop an artwork, so be it. But even with that proposal, they needed to include a thoughtful sketchbook spread that documents their creative process, as well as transition from one idea to the next. You may incorporate your written proposal as a part of your sketchbook spread. So this is when I started to make the connection where not every student wanted to write. And of course, that's an important skill for our students to know and learn. But I was happy to see that students were taking this and running with it. They were writing, they were proposing ideas. And at some point I had to take a step back and go, this is what they need. This is what they want to learn. So how can I merge my curriculum of formal and technical abilities and share new medias with them to make this a new and exciting program for them? And you can see at the bottom, there's a conference where you have that student present their work. So there is an accountability part of this. It's not just, I want to do this and then you just do it. They still need to sit down with you and go through their sketchbook. So they're documenting, they're journaling, they're reflecting. And this is an active process. Just a little bit more clarification. And again, this is, you know, a tangent from sketchbooks, but I think it's important to recognize that the sketchbooks build upon these independent projects. So the objective there, it says to develop a challenging artwork that invites new subject matter and media, employs knowledge of good craftsmanship, develop practical skill sets as they relate to a specific media, expand upon prior knowledge of composition and the elements of principles of art to create a successful work of art. And then work should be derived from one of the following. And I've always thought that these three themes really kind of capture it all. It's a concept, a theme, a meaningful message, and then an inspirational artist as reference. And almost always my students have found a way to pinpoint their ideas to that. And then here, the proposal, again, just a specific topic, the type of work, what they need. So they're coming to you with this idea and they're prepared. And if they weren't prepared, I'd send them away and ask them to come back until they're ready for that conference. Now, meanwhile, there's a lot happening in the classroom. People are doing other things. They're working on the assignments at hand. So looking back to the types of sketchbook prompts, before they were narrow focused, they were teacher directed, they had similar outcomes. One of my very first, and I'm so fortunate I have no examples of this, one of my first years teaching, I asked every student, I gave them a list, and every week we just did something different. And the first one was to draw a bicycle. And if I Googled to today, I Googled bicycle, this one bicycle showed up with a basket on the front. And that same day, I looked at probably 30 sketchbooks with the exact same bicycle, either traced, drawn, or pasted into their sketchbook. And that proved nothing. The students had no interest. They were just getting it done. And, you know, that was tedious for me to have to sit there and grade that. Why not have it now to the point where the students are begging to have their sketchbooks back? And then now they're open-ended, they're inquiry directed, they're multimedia, they're multifaceted. And hopefully if we can see my face, I can even show you. I'm in my classroom this evening. I have a whole sketchbook lab and corner as part of my room where students have access to materials to do these exciting things. So here's their sketchbook prompts before, right? What is metamorphosis? There's that definition. Include examples of objects in conflict and unison. How can objects in conflict create beauty? Select 2 objects to further focus and refine. The language was just, it was too much, right? The students were overwhelmed. I was getting the questions the day before. Well, what do you mean? Does this mean what you want? Am I going to get a good grade? And I was stricken by how the students were relying on my opinion to think if their work was great or not. And that shouldn't have been the case. Here on the right, you see the language was starting to change. Discover and define. Clay body, earthenware. So we had done a small lesson on actually creating clay. Media exploration. So just changing the language started to help the students see what they can do. So exploring, develop a ceramic piece that's inspired by a unique pattern in nature. Consider how that pattern can be repeated to create an engaging composition. How can the different types of clay bodies impact your final design? Consider colors and textures that would be most appropriate for your design. And then at the bottom, object study and visual chatter. And visual chatter, I cannot take credit for. There is an incredible art teacher who teaches down the road from me at Fleetwood High School. Her name is Diane Chisdak. And I owe a lot of what I'm going to share in the next few slides to her. And I've shared just how she's a veteran of 30 plus years. And I look up to her as an educator because she just really has done some beautiful things with sketchbooks. So I'm just at the cusp of starting these things, but I owe a lot to her. So that's where that visual chatter piece comes from. It can be illustrations, it can be doodles, it can be collage, it can be painted. It's just an amalgamation of things coming together, and the students are now finding meaning in that. So this is what started to happen, right? This is students being given a little more choice, and you can see there's multimedia. This central figure here with the yellow and then the green, blue, and red, that was her response to color. The one right in the center, that's the one value. And that's a student who's not incredibly talented, but it was able to work. He was showing me examples of value. Sure, we're still getting the definitions because he was comfortable with that. And then you have a young lady on the right. I had never seen this side of her. She just opened up and threw textures and drawings and illustrations. And before those requirements were hindering her. I'll leave this up if you want to just look at those for a moment. Students were now documenting. And this was active. I wasn't even grading these. I just simply reminded students in ceramics, make sure you document your process. Show me that you are recognizing the changes that are happening so that if you need to talk about your work to someone other than me, that you would be fluent enough to be able to do that. And again, here's an exemplary example of a young lady who's been throwing for some time. And she's making notes. She's writing down artists. She's writing what's working, what's not working, where her almost aspirations are to move forward. It's always fun to look back to and see what they've done. This is when we went full blown and I just said, go for it. Traditionally, I'd ask fill an entire spread. It was quite overwhelming for some of my students. And I said, just fill half a spread. Do it to the size that's most appropriate for you. And this was our response. We went to New York last year and I said, take a few nights and I just want you to respond in a way that's most appropriate to you. And this is what I got. I was blown away. They were throwing pictures, they were drawing, they were writing, and they were having conversations with each other. The prompts were becoming a little bit less restrictive. I'm just saying, show me an example of pattern, texture, line. Those are some of the 3 that you can see most evident here. But that was it. There were no other requirements, just to fill a spread, or half a spread, I'm sorry. And they got it. They did it on their own. And I almost had to at points say, we can't be doing this in class, right? We spend a few minutes each day, or maybe one day out of the week, that's fine. But it really started to take off. Here's some more examples. This was a lesson on op art and geometric abstraction, and I just said, respond in a way, again, that's most visually appropriate and meaningful to you. And it's scary to give that much freedom to students, especially high school students. Sometimes you think that they're going to abuse that or go in a way that's not what you're expecting. But I think that's the beauty of why we try these things. And I have a very supportive and arts enthusiastic administration. So I'm very happy and just like I said, fortunate to be able to just try these things and almost let things fail. But being upfront with your students, I mean, this texture piece at the top is just exquisite. On the bottom left here, this cardboard and the rose and the eye, this also dealt with texture. Really beautiful. All right. So my new approach to sketchbooks, and this is really exciting because things are changing, and I think you'll find that this new approach is a little bit different. In some ways, I've gone backwards, and I am requiring a little bit more, but it's opening up to new possibilities. So I have this worksheet, and I don't have it in the worksheet template here so that you can see just a little bit clearer, and I'm happy to share this. But I've entitled it to Look, See, Think, and Respond. Just this past year, our Fine Art Appreciation course, it's a 10th grade required humanities, was where I could have relied on every student to grasp a collection of, I usually taught about 40 to 50 artists. And it was a half-year course, maybe even a marking period. It was every other day. And the administration decided to pull that class. Not that it was for any negative reasons, but to give students more choice in electives. So it's not a mandated requirement. So because of that, my studio courses, I wasn't as heavily pushing art history. So I've had to really reconsider the value of sketchbooks to me this year, because it wasn't about just technique. It wasn't about process. It's now really about thinking and responding. And this process has really, I've only gone through it twice now with a few classes, so I don't have a great deal of example to show you, but I want to just share that this has been amazing. Every studio does the exact same process. So let me just read this through and just share how great this has worked out for me and my students. So the goal is to generate an art journal that explores past and contemporary practices, concepts, and ideas, as well as the artists themselves. Through visual interpretation and personal reflection, your journal will serve as the framework for personal investigation and knowledge of real-world issues faced by artists. And I love to emphasize that, because not that it's not important to teach past and historical artists, but I'm fortunate that the students at this point have learned enough of past artists that I'm really focusing on the contemporary. But just so you'll see in the next slide, we talked about Vermeer, we were talking about Raphael and Titian. Like, those artists still have so much importance in our class, but it's not what I'm stressing every day. So the process is every 2 weeks, I'm still sticking to that 2 weeks, students are presented with one of the following, whether it's a mini lecture, an article, a newspaper, an exhibition, or an image. So they're not getting a 2x2 square of definition and response. It's not a please draw a bicycle. It's changing. It's keeping students on their toes. They're trying new things. This past week, we did a reflection on Robert Indiana. I'll show in the next slide. Each journal entry may vary in size, but it's expected that you fill at least one page in a sketchbook with your response. It's your responsibility to keep up with your journal, as assignments will be given every 2 weeks. However, you'll only be graded at the end of a marking period. So I did collect, oops, I'm sorry, let me go back. I did grade their first ones. I did collect it just to kind of make sure that they understand the process. But again, they got it. The grade journal entry is worth 25 points, totaling 100 points at the end of a marking period. Of course, do what's most appropriate for you and your students. And these explanations should reflect who you are. It's not expected that every artist or idea excites you, but as a developing visual learner, you're expected to respond in some manner appropriate to your style and interest. So here's where it breaks down. Part one, our district, like I shared before, is really pushing literacy. It's just, it's a goal for our entire district to really just focus on writing, reading, and everything in that realm. Excuse me. So doesn't matter the type of prompt, whether it's a written, a visual, however I give it to them, they're expected to write, a 2 to 3 sentence that brings it all together, that demonstrates their knowledge and understanding of that particular artist or idea. So looking at the work of, say, Robert Indiana, they have to write, Robert Indiana was a pop artist, worked during this era. This is one of his notable works. Great. That's the basics: who, what, when, where, why. I tried thinking about it as like a tweet. I even asked the students, hey, would you think if it was cool if I had share a tweet about your artist or they were like, that's lame. And I was like, okay, I'll just leave it called the basics. And that's cool, right? We're inviting the students to make those conversations and have those decisions. So the second piece is the choice. And this is where I think it's really taken off. So they have to, the left side here talks about how they are graded. It's on 3 bits of criteria. So the first is thought given. Time was spent working through a response that was most appropriate to you. Creative exploration, evidence of creative endeavors through choice of media, composition, and or meaningful extensions. The last is then evidence of artistic engagement. So making meaningful connections that will support you as a growing artist. So sure, we have really fantastic standards at the national level, and as PA, my district allows me to adopt the national standards, even though it's not 100% voted through in the state, right? So I'm not looking at standards right now. I'm just asking the students to make connections. So they have to pick a choice. And here are those choices. So the first one's written. First impressions. What caught your attention? What about this artist or idea intrigues you? What connections can I make to it? And they don't have to answer everything. They might just free write. The second is a visual option, a personal inquiry. Integrate your own artistic style with what you observed or read, a visual mashup of 2 or more ideas. And I should add, each of these little choices came from the students. They helped me build this because I could label students to each of these categories. I know who's going to give me what each week, but this was now their opportunity to kind of say, this works for me. The third option there is visual and written. It's a concept map. It's a web of connections and questions that come about. Who can I connect this artist to? What might their ideas influence? I've had a lot of great success with that. The fourth is the visual and tactile. Material study. Consider the process and recreate it on your own. Be mindful to document your process in some way that can be preserved in your journal. So I have a young lady who you show her something and it is her goal, whether it is the most outlandish glass or encaustic, enamel. She wants to figure out how to do it. So as long as they can show me a way of putting it in their sketchbook, that's great. First day of class, I met a young man and we got off in total side tangent. He was rapping and I made a comment, I love to beatbox. And right there in the first day of school, we freestyled. I started beatboxing in front of 30 students. He starts rapping and he's now turned his sketchbooks in as MP3 files and he raps about the artists. That's amazing. I would have never gotten that before if I said, you need to give me the definition and give me, it's awesome. He's finding a way to make it work for him. The fifth is visual and written, a retrospective, curate a spread of that artist's achievements and our notable works throughout their lifetime. I have some of those overachiever students that just want to show me everything about an artist and show me everything that they've done. That's awesome, right? It's what's making sense for them. Visual and written, the last one, is just simply a personal reflection. Where does this artist's work fit into now? What is the lasting impact? And how can I connect with this artist? Then again, you can't, right? You're stuck. You don't know where to make a choice. I just have a talk with Hoffman, right? Your ideas stretch beyond the scope of what is available to choose from. Connect for a conference and we can collaborate. And 9 times out of 10, the students are able to make a choice, but occasionally that student who asks, can I write a rap? And I have another young lady who's doing a spray paint stencil. She's asking, can I work with this different material? That's fine. So there it is, reiterated at the bottom right. You got to make a choice, one of these 6 options or a conference, and then include part 1, a 2 to 3 sentence that brings it all together. All right. Have I lost anyone yet? Are we doing okay? There's a lot of great stuff. At least I hope it's great stuff. I hope you can just take something tonight and maybe implement it in your own classroom, or it sparks a new idea for you. Because again, just because it works for me doesn't necessarily mean that it has to work for you. This is just something that's been really powerful for my students. So of course, so here is that process of what I just showed you, making a choice and learning from it. So this was, I simply told the students, I gave them a list, like 10 color schemes, primary, secondary, tertiary, like all that fun jazz. And these are their responses. I didn't tell them what to use. I didn't tell them how to do it. The left one, this young lady, I believe these are zodiac signs or hieroglyphics. The one in the middle was just putting swatches. And the one on the right, she found this amazing artist. And this was the very first one I got for the year. I was just blown away, absolutely blown away. This is a young lady I'm going to show you in a few moments, an exceptional spread. She is very talented young lady, but this was her response to color. She took it upon herself to make little sketchbooks inside of her sketchbook. And here are the 10 things that I asked for: hue, shade, value, tint, warm colors, cool colors. Like, that's what she did. I could not have imagined how to even give a requirement to ask for this. I'm just, like I said, I'm baffled. I'm so amazed. I'm so proud of my students and what they've accomplished. And she was so excited. She comes running in just to show me. I mean, that never happened before. Here's my bicycle that I drew terribly. No, like, this is incredible. And when I even told her that I was going to show it to the state, she's like, oh my gosh, they're blown away. So here is, I see some chats. All right. So this is the responses I got from the work of Robert, Indiana. So you can see there's the 2 to 3 sentences. Some people wrote great deals. Some people did a personal reflection. Some people drew. Some people wrote. It's awesome. I love the little ink illustration at the bottom. Right here, the student, right, trying to recreate his works and showing me the precise and symmetrical, the broken up letters. Here in the top right, you can see we have bubble printing. This is done in the bottom left with straws and just dyes and paints. Really cool. This is my upper level students. I asked them to just do a material study, right? Do charcoal and take 2 seconds and write down what's going well and what's not. These are her thumbnails, right? This is our students working in that back room. And they're finding ways to document and make it meaningful. So sure, we're still doing those traditional things, but they were also able to accomplish other things on their own. Really proud. I've got another example of just how the sketchbook's being used every day. My Art Studio Advanced course is doing a whole macro montage. So you can see the exploration of things up close and from afar, and how I don't even ask them to do these things. They're doing them on their own. They're making studies, they're drawing, they're printing out images, and it's all finding their way into their sketchbook. And it's because this requirement's not there anymore. It's because it's become a part of who they are. And this is my most recent spread. We had a wonderful critique I'll show in the next image. This is my advanced drawing and painting students. This is my equivalent to an AP studio, so to speak. So these are my upper level. And using that same think, look, respond worksheet, I just said, pick an artist and you're going to share it in 2 weeks. And this is just a few of the ones that I got. I didn't know some of these artists, right? Of course, we know Yakusami at the bottom. We have Vermeer in the top. Leonardo da Vinci's and his characters along the bottom. But then others were going on about this one at the top left. I'm struggling to read. Basile, it was the artist who did the posters for sci-fi movies. And then the one at the left, Todd Lockwood, was doing these dragon illustrations. And some students just wrote. I love this one in the center, this young lady wrote about Renee Magritte and the lovers and how they weren't able to kiss. And she just goes on. And this young lady in the center just found a paper towel and wrote on it and slapped it in her sketchbook. So it was so powerful and beautiful, because when they brought these to class that week, we just opened them up and we talked. And these students have been through the process. At the top right is what my traditional critique looks like. We get up, we look at our work, and I sit in the back. You can see me, maybe not me, but there's my barrel of pretzels, because I like to sit in the back. It is their time. And it's important, no matter whether it's a sketchbook, it's an artwork in any grade level. And I realize a lot of this is high school oriented. It can absolutely be manipulated to a younger level. But it's so powerful to have sketchbook or time to critique, finding ways to make connections to new artists and ideas. I'm notorious for never giving answers for students rather than questioning their questions. And it's student led. So this picture here on the left-hand side, and I can share that I have permission from all these students. So this PowerPoint can be shared and referenced at any point. This conversation went on for the entire 45-minute class with 7 kids and 7 sketchbooks. This young lady started talking about Yakusami, and it went on. And then we started talking about pattern, and then we talked about her life in the asylum and how she's working in the mental institute. And then it talked about this idea of like mental illness, and we talked about various settings and how those artists can strive, and it just kept going. And it kept going. And then we talked about this illustration here by a young man. We were looking at the work of, oh my goodness, Coraline. It's the, goodness, I'm thinking it's the Nightmare on Christmas movie. Nonetheless, that artist. And we just kept going. And it just started a conversation. And before I knew it, the bell rung and we had to leave. But the students were excited. They wanted to talk about it. And of course, we have the cheatsy one, like here we have Bob Ross, and we had a tangent. But it was so great to hear the students excited and to share these new ideas. And I can't even imagine designing a curriculum that would encompass all of these artists. I just couldn't, right? This is their interest. So exceptional student sketchbooks. Creativity takes courage, right, Matisse? I want to just show a few that just through this process now are just blowing me out of the water. And they're drawing, they're writing, they're note taking. Tim Burton, thank you, Susan. There it is, Tim Burton. Yeah, because we got on a tangent. We were talking about Edward Scissorhand, and then we talked about all of his other films, and then that conversation turned into Johnny Depp. And then we talked about different personalities. It just kept going and going. I've never thought to say at a high school level, we're going to teach about Tim Burton. But for that student, it was so important. And being able to have those conversations, right? My morning classes are tough to do that. It's 30 students. The afternoon is easy with my advanced. There's 7 to 8 students, right? It's going to work for you. But you saw that even in some of my earlier slides, I write notes back to the students. It's important to have that conversation. So thank you, Susan. All right. But here are some exceptional students. This is that young lady who was doing the portrait. And I apologize if I'm going at all quick, because it's just so fun to see them wanting to illustrate more and more. On the right is a really great, this is taken from last year, and I asked the students just at the end of the year to reflect on their processes and just what they liked and what they didn't like. We're human. I told them some things I do each year are out of just excitement. I want to try it. We all come back from the conference jazzed, and the students know, and I tell them in this upcoming October when I say, be ready when I come back, because things are going to change. And just for the heck of it, right? Why not expose them to something different? And this was her response. And all 6 parts of this pinwheel was a minute or clipping from a previous illustration she did that year. So you can see she did her still life here. This was a transformation piece, a still life of a painting, a black and white illustration, overlapping shapes and shading. And then this was a collage. And she's writing, right? This is what kickstarted it all. Really impressive. Here's some other illustrations looking at color swatches, the figure, value, color, all that great stuff. and I joke with the students, right? And by no means should anyone take offense to this, but I joke with, even because being that the college is right next to us, I always say, if you're not actively journaling or sketching or even observing, you're a bum. And I playfully say that with them because it makes them recognize that what they're doing is important. Jotting down a note just every day, just write down one thing, draw a circle. As long as you're engaged for one moment of every day, something's going to happen, and it's going to happen for the better. And that's where you get these exceptional models, right? This is all about texture and gesture. I mean, it is just breathtaking. So this has been probably the most, it just changed my program this year. And this is my advanced students. We are now creating sketchbooks. And again, I go back to sharing just how wonderful I was able to do this with Diane Chisdak, the Fleetwood High School art teacher. So my students are at the bare bones. We are creating from the day one. We said, here you go. I'm putting a drill in your hands. You're going to drill. You're going to sew your pages, and it's going to happen. And there's my students hard at work, and they were like, I'm so afraid to use a drill, but they do it, right? It's impressive. And then we use mat board. We create strips. We have these different pieces here. They clip it together, and then they sew it. One part that I excluded, they were working on their covers, these large pieces of, off mylar, soft enough that you can wrap around. And you can see here, we wrap it, they build it, and give them these resources, and then we do it together. So that first image I showed you of the sketchbook that they get for $5, it was basic. I never really designed the covers. They fall apart by the end of the year. We've only been in school now for 4 weeks, and these kids will not let me take their sketchbook. If you can see them on the screen, like this is the one I made. This is the only one that I have to show you tonight because the kids will not let me take these from them. I have to grade them the same day, get them back to them because they cannot be separated. And it's a lengthy process. It was probably a week and a half to do this between the sewing, the making of their covers. I hope to refine that in the future. We take this color fadeless paper, you put on either side, you can see here it is bound. The kids learn how to sew, needle and thread, life skills right here. And then we bound their book. And here's my students hard at work doing this exact process. And I mean, you gotta be okay to just challenge them. Yeah, what's the worst that's gonna happen? So here's some of their final cover designs. As you can see on the far right, that's my Keith Haring version being the school of Keith Haring. But these are their covers, and just a few. I couldn't snag enough photos to get them all. We have Audubon's portrait of the Galapagos finches. We have this young lady dealing with a lot of stress and anger with the hand gestures, and then this just total random. And I apologize I don't have more to show you, but I hope this just kind of lets you see that they were able to do anything they wanted. This was their sketchbook. It was not the same black cover that every other student had. So that is just what makes them so incredibly valuable to them. So thinking ahead, what is the lasting impact of sketchbooks, right? If you can't already see that from my enthusiasm, my personal interest with it, and how my students are using it, look at it beyond just what's happening in our classrooms. I was fortunate to go to an AP Studio workshop over the summer. And for those who are high school teachers teaching it, we now have what is referred to as the sustained investigation. It's the concept of producing a series of sequential visual forms growing to explore in greater depth a particular visual concern. So very much so how I took it from is a large focus on the process and reflection. And you can include process pieces in their Studio AP portfolio. And that can be directly taken from their sketchbook. So all of those wonderful illustrations of writing and thumbnailing and putting those pieces together now has value. You can submit that for the AP Studio requirements. That's incredible. And even now, college portfolios, it's not explicit for every college, but always for portfolio days, open houses, you can take your sketchbooks. It's so much more personal, and colleges are accepting the work from those. They're accepting the actual sketchbook as something tangible to be seen and help in their acceptance to an art school. So just something to keep in the back of your head. They're really powerful. This is a great resource I wanted to share. I have these here for my students to use all the time, thinking about sketch note taking. The first is the handbook, the left. These are both by Mike Rode, and his site goes on. I mean, you can see just how playful and he helps you break down figures, how to interpret language into visuals. But this made sense for me as a visual note taker. It's able to jot things down in a more visual manner that just, again, made sense to what I was doing. I leave you with this. Here's some completed student work, some past, some recent. This portrait of Dali was just done probably Thursday, and this young man finished this awesome shoe on Friday. And I should mention both of these were just studies for their final work. They did it to figure out an idea, and they're following through. We're working with paint, acrylic, drawing, oil, collage, you name it, we've tried it here. So I leave you with this. These are my kiddos. Last week we were up at KU. We were working with the installation artists and constantly trying to make murals in our school for Why Not. Some great references to look back on and resources, and just leaving you with where you can find all that great stuff. So with that, before I open it up for questions, I do want to just end with this last slide. Please feel free to contact me with any questions, suggestions, or ideas. This is a growing process. I can't say that I figured it all out. I am the only art teacher at Kutztown High, so it's pretty exciting to be able to try these things and share them with folks. And I owe it to many people before me to have learned this content. We have a Google site. You can check out all of our projects, portfolios, all that good stuff. We have a great Instagram. And of course, as your region rep, for those who are down in this Berks County region up to Pike County, I'm happy to reach out. And my little plug for the Art at the Center, our PAEA conference, October 31st, November 3rd at State College. I'll be presenting again. So if you want to meet me in person, not through this screen, I'm going to be co-presenting with a handful of amazing artists and art teachers from around the state, Julian Nelson, Liza Johnson, and Kelly Bowen, for a hands-on workshop using Google Sites to create student portfolios. And there's just a brief description of that. I'm happy to answer anything at this point, and thank you guys for an awesome Sunday night with you all. So I got to figure out how to get to the chat. Bear with me. All right.
Yes, that was a lot of great information. So if you have questions for Ben, please feel free to type them right into the chat roll and he can answer them for you.
And can you see myself still right now?
Yes.
Cool. So am I full screen?
You are.
Cool. So I'm in my classroom right now. I thought I'd show you. This is my little sketch lab corner real quick. So over here, we have everything for the kids, from hot glue, marbleized, shaving cream, bubble printing, ink blots, pan pastels, jelly printing, craft paint, and then just stuff. You know, we collect random things throughout the year, and this is just their corner of just stuff, which I think is really valuable for our kids because they just need things to create. All right. I am in the chat, so if anyone has any awesome questions, I am here.
Please feel free to ask away.
And just to share a little bit, I mean, the sketchbooks are so valuable. The kids are keeping them with them all the time. They're reflecting, they're responding. I was reading an article just last night on the impact of a community for adolescents at the high school level. And even just having them journal for 5 minutes a day, whether it's through writing, through visual, really helps to foster that community with students. So that's just something to consider. And even if you're on a budget, I used to teach in a school where I couldn't even imagine to have, you know, half the items I have in my current setting. We still journaled, even if it was on lined paper. So don't let fancy materials stand in the way of letting the students be creative and make these meaningful connections. So I think that's something sometimes, you know, educators are scared by. Are you doing another sketchbook PAEA workshop again? I don't know. I think
Well, we did the sketchbook workshop at the last year with Diane and myself. We did kind of the mindfulness and sketchbooks, and she spoke to how her prompts are reflective of what she does in the classroom, and we made smaller sketchbooks. I'm hoping to, we haven't figured out what this year Region 10's event is going to be at KU. That's in the January 20th, around that date. I have to look, confirm that. But our new year, new inspiration workshop. How much time do they spend on sketchbooks during class time? Do you set any limits? Yes and no.
Over on this wall is all my due dates, my timelines, my everything from classes to anchors, sketchbooks, and all that good stuff. How it goes down is I tell the students that they can spend up to one full class period a week working on their journals. And if that means I'm taking 10 minutes every day to make up the equivalent to one class, that's fine. Some students will just be so invested in what they're doing that it extends just beyond that, but that's okay. And often I open my room before and after school so students will come to use materials if that's the reason why. But I think that's the limit I've pretty much set in place for those students, and it hasn't been a problem. And they're still getting their work done for other classes and for my class, of course. Looked amazing. Could not make it. All classes 50 minutes. Well, if you're thinking you couldn't make it, you could totally make it. It's super easy using contact paper, mat board, all that good stuff. And again, like I said, this is literally the exact one that I was taken from Fleetwood. I was really happy, but all classes are 50 minutes. We have such a bizarre schedule that every other day is either 40 minutes or 45 minutes. So it's an adjustment. It's the first year we're trying this, but it works. We make it work. Anything else for anyone? I have one question here right now. I'm not totally understanding.
I think that may be Lizbeth.
Lizbeth, what are you typing?
I think it's her, because I think she also signed in with PAEA account.
Yes, it is me. I'm sorry. I finally got on here. I'm sorry. I missed that part. I was trying to figure out, you said they could work, and I know I'm not supposed to be speaking. They could work up to X amount of minutes, a class period. I was curious how many minutes a week, and did it vary? So was it 45 minutes, or is it, I'm sorry, I'll mute myself again.
No, that's fine.
You're
For all
fine.
those who don't know Lizbeth, she's amazing. She's our PAEA president. So kudos to her and all the work she's been doing.
Yes, wonderful president.
But yeah, that's great. So every other day is either 40 minutes or 45 minutes. So a daily week, I mean, if we want to get technical, it's like 200 minutes or 220 minutes. So like I'll let them work for one class period out of that week. So 40 minutes or 45 minutes would be allocated to work on their sketchbooks. But like I said, they're out all the time. It might just be jotting down a note, a process, a document, throwing a photo in. It's really just been an exciting time for them to be a part of the process. Well, thank you.
They are. All right. Well, unless anybody else has any other questions.
Well, thank you again, everyone. I hope you guys are able to take something from this, make it, available to you. And if there's anything you need, those resources, I'm happy to share everything. My email's there. So please, once this gets posted, I think that's what's most important about our field, to take, borrow, and steal, right? Just to do it appropriately.
Yes, and if Ben has anything he wants to send out, the Act 48 link
Sure.
will be out in the next 24 hours, so we can also include something in there. Well, we really hope that everybody enjoyed your time with us tonight. And we have 2 more quick things before we go. First, we want to share the registration link for our next webinar. Our originally scheduled October webinar with a group of Kutztown University students has been rescheduled for March, so we will hopefully have a new October presenter soon, but we do have November scheduled, so we will share that link this evening. And that presentation will be about collaborative art for community building. So I'm going to add that to the chat roll right here. So there's the link. So please feel free to copy that link and register for that webinar. And of course, you can always find all of our links for our webinars and our other events on the PAEA website calendar, the PAEA Facebook pages, and most likely through email from your division or region reps. And second, please make sure that you have signed in on the chat roll to verify your participation in tonight's webinar. Remember to check your email for the Act 48 link coming in the next day or 2. So unless there's any other questions, so it says, so will there be a link to this PowerPoint in the coming email? Would you like to include that?
Absolutely, I can share that.
Okay, we will certainly send that out when we send the Act 48 link. So Ben will get that to me in the next 24 hours. So I will wait for that before we send out the Act 48 link. And eventually, once we get them edited, they do end up on our PAEA website. So they could take a week, it could take a few weeks, but just keep a lookout for those as well. So unless there's any other questions, then I believe that's a wrap.
Great.
And good night, everyone.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.